The Vessel That Drinks Three Oceans. Chapter 5. Ink That Does Not Fall. The sound of a small bell came through the salon's paneling in the hour when the afternoon was still the afternoon, but the lamps had begun to make their claim on it. A single clear note from somewhere forward in the ship, not repeated, brief as a watchmaker's tap on the crystal of a reassembled piece to confirm the glass had seated correctly. The oil lamps had been lowered slightly, not extinguished. The room had rearranged itself in the new light. Surfaces that had held one quality of amber now held another, darker at the edges, deeper at the center, the cartographer's corner, drawing inward as though the lamp there had decided to contain rather than project. The clocks in the vaulted ceiling above retreated into shadow, only the nearest faces still legible, their hands continuing their disagreements in the dimness. From the direction of the bell, through a door she had not opened, the smell of something warm and yeasty entered the salon. She followed it. The door connected to a short passage and opened onto a room she had not yet entered. A long table, 8 high-backed chairs in pairs, white linen catching the lamplight cleanly. At the table's center, a low vase of leafless branches, and from each branch hung small glass droplets suspended at various heights, unmoving. When the ship's motion shifted the lamplight across them, they threw small constellations of refracted color onto the linen below. The places had been set, bread on a wide plate, dark and dense, a cruse of olive oil, smoked fish, pulled apart into long pale portions on a shallow platter, hard cheese, a grey rind along its outer edge, water glasses. No one had been visible setting this out. The table was simply ready, with the settled certainty of a thing done many times in the same way. The cloth straight, the implements at their proper distances, nothing uncertain about any of it. She came slowly around the table before she sat. 8 places. The glass droplets on the branches caught the lamplight in small points that moved as the ship moved, each point traveling a millimeter south as the hull lifted, a millimeter north as it settled. The droplets themselves remained fixed on their branches, only the light they held in motion. Glass blown thin enough to be nearly weightless, each one the size of a large grape. The proportions very slightly uneven in the way of handmade things, no two exactly the same diameter. She counted them along the first branch, 7. Along the second, 11. She stopped counting on the third. The passengers arrived. Solange came first, her knitting folded under one arm. She took 2 chairs from the head of the table, set the second adjacent to her own rather than across, arranged her water glass to the left of her plate, and gave no visible attention to any of these decisions. Mireille appeared from below, the canvas bag of bottles gone, jacket pockets flat and emptied, and she pulled out the chair nearest the door and dropped into it with the ease of someone long past ceremony. The boy came in from somewhere, took the chair furthest from the lamp, and sat without settling, in the way of someone who has not committed to staying. The woman in the cream-colored dress came last, hair completely white against an unlined face, silver bangles chiming against one another as she drew back the chair at the head of the table. She sat. Her eyes remained closed. The remaining chair was the one beside Mireille. Lena took it, her back to the porthole. The cartographer was not here. Through the open door and across the short passage, The edge of his table was visible, the lamp, the faint continuous movement of the pen. He was still working. No one said grace. No one explained the food. Mireille pulled the bread toward her side of the table, tore a portion, passed the plate without comment, and Lena received it the same way, practically without ceremony. The bread was dense, the interior moist, with something she could not immediately place. Fennel, eventually. A slight sweetness from fennel seed in the dough, the kind of flavor that asserted itself only after the first swallow, as though it had been waiting for a moment of quiet attention before making itself known. The woman in the cream dress dipped one finger into her water glass and touched it to her left cheek. The drop of water stayed on her cheekbone without drying, bright and held, the way water stayed on cold stone before the surface could absorb it. Lena looked and looked away. 15 minutes later, or approximately 15 minutes, the time on the ship being what it was, the drop was still there. The same drop, at the same point on the same cheekbone, catching the lamplight in the same small bright point. Still there when the smoked fish plate had been passed and passed again. Still there when Mireille had refilled her water glass twice. Lena did not ask about this. The woman in cream did very little beyond eating with small deliberate movements and sitting with her eyes closed and her hands in her lap between bites. She had the quality of stillness that was not absence, but the opposite. A very full presence, directed somewhere other than the room. Not inward exactly. Directed at something at the same distance as the room, but not inside it. The way a person at a window looked at what was outside without looking through the glass itself. At some point during the meal, the bangles on her wrists chimed once. Both wrists simultaneously, without any movement of her hands. There was no explanation available, and Lena did not attempt one. The table held its own kind of quiet. The quiet of people who had eaten together often enough to be past the place where small talk had anything to offer. The bangles rang faintly when the woman in cream raised and lowered her fork. Mireille ate with the efficiency of someone who had more important things to return to. The boy ate almost nothing and gave the suspended glass droplets on the branch the unbroken attention he brought to everything outside the windows. Above the droplets, the refracted light moved in slow arcs across the linen as the ship moved. Once, years ago, her father had placed a prism on the kitchen windowsill for reasons he had not explained, and she had sat beside it for most of a Saturday, watching the spectrum it threw across the far wall travel through the morning as the sun shifted. She had not understood at the time why this cost her a whole Saturday without her feeling it go. The glass droplets on the branch were not a prism. They threw no spectrum. What they threw were contained points of the lamplight's own color, small and precise, and when a droplet moved by a fraction, which happened perhaps once every several minutes for no reason she could determine, the point of light traced a slow arc across the white linen and came to rest somewhere new. The arrival of each new resting place had a quality of inevitability, as though the point had been going to that position all along and had only needed the interval. Mireille looked up from her plate. "He polishes them," she said, not lowering her voice. "Every morning, with a cloth that has been used for nothing else for many years. The cartographer, before he begins his work, He does not explain this, but I have seen him. She considered the bread in her hand. He told me once that a drop of ink is not a point, but a sphere, that it appears to be a point only because we look at it from the outside. She set down the bread. I have thought about this for 2 years and cannot say with certainty what he meant. A pause. At the head of the table, the bangles chimed once, lightly, without visible cause. I think, Mireille said, that he means you have to get very close to something before you understand its actual shape. She picked up the bread again. But I am not sure. He does not correct me when I say this. He also does not confirm it. The boy had turned from the glass droplets and was looking at the porthole on the starboard side. Through the glass, the Pacific evening was going from blue to indigo to the deeper blue that preceded dark, the stages of it occurring too gradually for the eye to track the transition, but too completely for the eye to deny it had occurred. He looked at the porthole for a long time. His lips were not moving. Whatever he was doing at the porthole was not the same thing he had been doing at the porthole in the salon, or with the dolphins from the rail, or with the ice from the cabin window. This was simply looking, the way people looked at the Pacific when the Pacific offered itself at the end of a day and asked nothing back. After the meal, the passengers dispersed, as people did, whose routines were settled enough not to require discussion. Solange back to the salon, the woman in cream to the deck, her bangles chiming on the staircase, the boy to somewhere below, Mireille to the door, 3 bottles retrieved from her jacket that had somehow refilled itself since she had sat down. She went without commentary, with the quick, certain step of someone returning to work that was also, in some way she did not announce, a form of devotion. Lena stayed a moment longer at the table. The branch and its droplets continued their slow occupation of the lamplight. One point of light completed an arc of perhaps 3 centimeters and came to rest in a new position on the white linen, and the place it rested had nothing distinguishing it from any other place on the cloth, and yet it had arrived there with the quality of having been going there all along. She held this without pressing it into anything, and then she rose and went back through the passage to the salon. The cartographer had laid a fresh sheet beside his current page. On the right, the Pacific map, the ship at the center of the circular horizon. On the left, a new one begun, a coastline with a more complex interior, rivers running inland, a broad bay with an island in its mouth. She settled into her chair by the alcove. The coffee was there again, at the temperature of a cup set down 10 minutes ago. The note from below began. It rose through the marble floor, slower than the Pacific phrase. 3 descending steps held, then the same steps approached from a different direction, then a pause, then the first step again. The water glass on the small table beside her responded, ringing faintly at the rim, the kind of sound that stopped when she listened for it and resumed when she attended to something else. She attended to something else. Across the salon, the cartographer set down his pen. He leaned back from the table, the first adjustment to his posture in the entire day. For a moment, he had the look of an old man who has done a full day's work he cares about and has arrived at its natural limit. Not the tiredness of someone who has been pushing at something that resisted, but the tiredness of someone whose output has been received. Then he picked the pen back up, but differently, held at the base only, Between thumb and forefinger, the nib turned upward toward the lamp. She set her coffee cup on its saucer. A slow, deliberate flick. The wrist turned through a long arc, and from the nib, 6 droplets left first, then 10 more, then a stream. 20, 30, 40 small spheres of indigo ink that rose from the nib and entered the lamplight above the table and stopped. They arranged themselves. Each droplet moved by a fraction, settling into a precise position relative to the others, and the pattern that emerged was a coastline drawn in 3 dimensions in the air above the table. A bay with an island at its mouth, 2 rivers running inland, each a thin line of droplets 2 centimeters above the surface of the page. The long coast curving away in both directions, one arm extending into the lamplight, the other reaching toward the shadow at the room's edge. The aerial coastline cast a faint shadow on the paper below, an indigo shadow. The coastline's own silhouette in 2 dimensions on the page it had risen from. She rose from her chair and came to the table. Up close, the individual droplets held their spherical shape, surface tension maintaining each one against nothing. No membrane, no glass, only its own coherence. Inside each droplet, the indigo ink moved by the faintest degree. The pigment turning within its own contained boundary, as though it had not yet decided where to rest. She raised her hand. Her fingertip came within 2 centimeters of the nearest droplet, the large one at the center of the bay's mouth, approximately representing the island. The droplet did not respond to the proximity. The warmth of her hand arrived at it across the small gap of still air. She held her finger there. The droplet held. The warmth kept arriving, and the droplet received it without any alteration. The way a thing held in its own balance did not need external confirmation that the balance was correct. After a moment, she withdrew her hand. "The island," she said. "In the bay. Are we going there?" The cartographer's pen rested across the paper. "The ship goes where the ship goes," he said. "I draw what is there." One of the suspended droplets drifted by a millimeter and settled again. "What are you drawing?" she said. "When you draw the places the ship is about to reach." He was quiet for a long moment. In the lamp's amber, the aerial coastline hung above the page, patient. The rivers held their positions. The island held the mouth of the bay. "The part that is ready to be seen," he said. She stood with this. The island at the mouth of the bay had a density the rest of the map did not share. More droplets clustered there, the ink more concentrated, the shape of it more defined than the longer, thinner lines of the rivers and the open coast, as though the island had accumulated more attention than its size warranted, as though it had been ready the longest. The note from below continued its 3 descending steps. The water glass responded at the rim. Then, one by one, the droplets returned to the pen. The island first, the cluster at the bay's mouth, separating and resolving back toward the nib, each sphere completing its return before the next began. Then, the mouth of the bay. Then the rivers, each one dissolving thread by thread from the outermost droplet inward. Then the long coast, both arms coming in from their ends. Orderly, a disassembly she had done many times at the bench, component by component, in the proper sequence, nothing rushed. The sequence itself carrying the logic of how the thing had been built. When the last droplet had returned, he selected the fresh sheet and began again. She went back down the spiral staircase to the library. The same low amber light, the same shelves of colored spines. She pulled a red one from the middle shelf, took it to the reading table, opened it. The first page was blank. The second was blank. On the third, a single sentence in the cartographer's precise hand. A map does not draw where you are going. It draws what you are ready to see. She sat with this for a moment without turning the page. The lamp breathed beside her. Through the porthole above the bookshelves, the Pacific had deepened into its evening blue. She turned the page. Maps of rooms, interiors, a salon with a vaulted ceiling, clocks in rosettes, a narrow corridor, frames along the walls, a library panelled in dark walnut, shelves floor to ceiling. At the library's center, a reading table. At the reading table, a woman in a dark coat. In her open left hand, something small and round, 24 teeth around the rim. She turned again. The same room, the same woman, but the angle shifted. The library from the doorway, the bookshelves receding into depth, the lamp a source of light rather than a mark on a page. The woman at the table was not looking at the thing in her hand. She was looking at the open book before her. She turned again. The same room. The woman had both palms flat on the table, the round object set aside near the lamp. The cartographer's precise line had given the woman's hands the same attention he gave coastlines, the knuckles as headlands, the small depressions between the fingers as shallow bays, the grain of the skin recorded in the cross-hatching of the ink, the way shoreline texture was recorded in his coastal maps. Not decorative, not approximate, the actual record of a surface that had been looked at for long enough to be understood. She turned one more page. In this map, the woman was gone. The table remained, the lamp, the open book. On the table beside the lamp, the object with its 24 teeth, set down in the lamp's direct light, casting a small gear-shaped shadow on the walnut. She closed the red book. She set her palms flat on the reading table and felt the walnut under them. The grain, the warmth the lamp had pressed into the wood over the long course of the day, and through the wood, arriving through the ship's own structure, faint and sustained, the note from below. 3 descending steps, the lowest held, the pattern beginning again. She pressed her palms a fraction harder. The note came up through the wood and into the bones of her wrists and moved there at a frequency she could not have named. A fusee pocket watch from 1780 had done something like this once. The mainspring coiled past its safe tension for so long the torque had traveled through the case and through the velvet mat and into the benchwood itself. And she had understood before opening the case that the spring had been held at that tension far longer than it had been made to hold. She had not known, sitting at the bench that morning, that she had been listening for exactly this. The way a thing communicated its own history through the material it rested on, if the person receiving it was willing to hold still long enough and not reach for a tool before the communication was finished. The lamp beside the table breathed its amber light. She did not count the breaths.